Hello, my name is Aaron Murphy, and welcome to the West Shore Archive. Today's guest is journalism teacher Mark Schledorn. Mr. Schledorn is an award-winning pioneer in student journalism and has a rich past as a journalist in Florida. Please welcome Mark Schledorn. So, Mr. Schledorn, where did you grow up?
The first 12 years of my life in Miami, and then from 1970 until I graduated high school, Indian Harbor Beach.
Mm-hmm. So where did you go to school in both places?
In Miami, I went to a school called Broadmoor Elementary until I was in 4th grade, and the teachers went on strike, and I accidentally set my friend on fire, and my parents put me in private school, and then we moved up here. And then when I moved up here, we went to Hoover Junior High, which was a fairly new building at the time. And then after that, I went to Satellite.
Mm. So when you were in high school, did you know you wanted to be a teacher or a journalist? Did you know what you're going to try to do with your life?
No.
No?
When I was in high school, I mostly worked on my car and surfed and worked a lot of hours at the O'Galley Yacht Club so that I could afford to work on my car.
Mm-hmm.
I took auto mechanics at Satellite all 3 years that I was there. High school was just 10 through 12 in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So I had the shop at school to work on my car and the use of those tools and such. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I did write in my speech teacher, Sarah Brewer, I wrote in her yearbook that I would come back and be a teacher at Satellite. Probably because I had a crush on Sarah Brewer when she was my teacher. And then I did come back and I worked with her like 20 years later. Yeah, 20 years after that. Yeah, so maybe, I don't know. I ended up in journalism because I was always much better with that side of my brain. I could write, I could edit, I could spell, and the career of the 80s, I went to college, I graduated in 81, so I started in the 70s. But the career in the 80s they were projecting was going to be public relations. There's going to be a big demand for public relations. And so so that's what I went into because that's what they told me would be, an opportunity for my skill set. And then when I got into it in the upper level classes at UCF, journalism there were 3 sequences. There was public relations, there was advertising, and there was news editorial. Mm-hmm. And we took a lot of common classes with the other sequences, and I just kept drifting toward the journalism part. I'm not really good at shaking people's hands and telling them everything's going to be swell, which is what public relations mostly is building up the reputation for your company. But I was interested in injustices, what I perceived to be injustices. Sometimes they were actual injustices. And so I drifted into the news editorial sequence, and the rest is, as they say, history.
Right. So you went to UCF, and so what did you major in?
Journalism. But journalism, within the major of journalism, there were 3 tracks. You could do public relations, news editorial, or advertising.
I find that interesting. I don't really see how public relations is.
I mean, public relations is journalism from the other side of the table, really.
I guess so.
So what you're trying to do in public relations is influence the media that your company or person you're representing is woo. So you're sending out press releases to try to entice the media to write stuff, happy, stuff about your person or company. So,
did you like UCF?
I didn't know anything else, and I mainly went there. I went there for all the wrong reasons. First of all, when I started, it was FTU, Florida Tech, and they changed the name. We were not the Golden Knights, we were the Citronauts, which was half grapefruit, half spaceman, which was kind of cool, actually. And they started football while I was there. I think 79 is when they started football. And what was your original question? Because I just...
Did you like it there?
Yeah, I mean, it was really small. It probably wasn't much bigger than Cocoa Campus EFSC, because it was pretty new.
It's like the biggest college now.
Oh, I know,
It's crazy.
I know. So it opened in '63, which seems a long way, like 15, 16 years from when I went there, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, the big growth, football was one of the big things that turned it into this giant. I mean, football matters even if the students don't like football. It just puts you in the nation's eye repetitively. That's a public relations move there.
So after college, how did you get into professional journalism?
Well, while I was in college, I worked on the campus newspaper. I worked as sports editor for a little while, although I didn't really know much about sports. There just was an opening. And mostly as the entertainment editor. I went to college. Once I knew I wanted to be a journalist, what I thought I wanted to do was review movies, because I thought it was a pretty sweet job. You got to see movies. This is before there was VHS, before there were DVDs. No streaming, of course. But you got to go to the movies. Like most malls had 10 theater multiplexes, and you got to see the movies Thursday morning at 10 o'clock that were coming out on Friday. So it'd be like me and somebody from the Orlando Sentinel and somebody else in there watching movies and taking notes because you're writing these reviews. And I thought that's pretty sweet, and I like movies a lot. Couple problems with it is you have to see all the movies, and most movies you really don't want to see. Yeah, and it just feels like, oh, I've seen this movie before, and so that's what I wanted to do. And then I also realized at some point that, like, every town has a sheriff, but not every town has a film critic, so they aren't in that high of demand.
Right.
I mean, you have to build up a persona over time. So I did that in college, and then I started, when I graduated, which was in the fall of '81, as I recall, a long time ago. I started applying to jobs all over the state, but we were in it was the worst recession between the Great Depression and 2008. So there were no jobs, especially for liberal arts kind of guys like me. So I worked at a gas station, Santoro's Amico in Orlando, and I was pretty bitter, and they asked me on the school newspaper where I had been working, the UCF newspaper, if I'd write reviews for them, and I said only under the condition that my byline said Mark Schledorn, gas station attendant. And I have copies of the school newspaper because I was like, I went to college and this is what I get. Because I was young and dumb, I just thought you get your college, you get your ticket stamped, and somebody gives you a job, but that's not how it works. So after 11 months of being bitter and spinning around, I got a job at a small paper in Winter Haven. The news chief was an afternoon newspaper, about 17,000 circulation, really small. And I worked there. That's where I met my wife. I worked there for 3 years. My grandparents lived in that town, so I had a landing spot. I actually stayed in an upstairs apartment behind their house, which they rented out. My grandfather charged me rent. He's like, "You're not special." Okay. I mean, I appreciate it, but.
So what was that first job like? And what were you doing?
So the first job, it was probably the most fun I ever had in journalism, because it was a small paper and there weren't these layers of bureaucracy, so that you could come in and say, hey, so let me back up. So my job was copy editor, which means I sat at a copy desk, and everything that went in the newspaper, my job was to edit it, not everything, but because sports had their own copy editors, but like 3 people read every story in the news section.
Yeah.
I laid out the pages, and I wrote headlines, and I edited copy. I did not do reporting because that really wasn't my jam. So within 6 months, because it was such a small newspaper, on Sunday, so our normal deadline was we put the paper to bed at around, I want to say 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because probably earlier than that. I think at 1 o'clock, because it was an afternoon paper.
Yeah.
It was in the racks by 4, and it was delivered to people's houses. That meant we had to be to work at 5 in the morning to work on the paper, because we had, when you had newspapers, there were multiple editions. So the farther the paper was away from the physical plant, those were printed earlier,
Mhm.
and then you do another one for the medium range, and then another one for just right around town.
Yeah.
That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So within 6 weeks, on Sunday we printed a morning paper because we just did. So that meant we worked Saturday nights, and because my boss didn't want to work Saturday nights, within 6 weeks I was in charge of the Sunday front page and the A section,
Mhm.
front section of the newspaper. I'm like 25 years old,
Right.
24 years old, and like clueless.
Mhm.
I mean, what could go wrong? Fortunately, I didn't get anybody sued or anything, but I could have because I really didn't know what I was doing. Funny anecdotal story, as long as you're not paying for tape. But my boss was a muckraker in the 1980s. I mean, he was just trying to stir up trouble in town all
really?
the time, in a good way. I mean,
Right.
he was trying to. He's written several books now, but so one day he went to lunch. Everybody went to lunch. I was working the front page, and the paper had to go to press while everybody was at lunch. And we used to have news services like United Press International, Associated Press, and they would move stories. It was kind of like the internet is now, but nobody had the internet
Right.
at home, only the news agents. And a story moved that said urgent in all caps. So I thought, this must be important. It probably should be on the front page because the morning papers won't have it because it's in our news cycle. And it was about a military coup on the island of Cyprus. So I pulled something off the front page. I edited the story. I wrote a headline. I put it on the front page, and I hit send. I yelled, "Stop this!" Like in movies, they're always yelling, "Stop the presses." I actually said, "Stop the presses," so that they could put this story in. And I was feeling pretty proud of myself. Like Ken, my boss, he's going to think man, I trained you right. So I come back from lunch, and I'd no sooner sit at my desk than I hear my last name. Actually, he called me Schlady. He said, "Schlady, get the hell in here." And I go into his office, and he says, "Close the blinds," which you knew you were going to get chewed on, right? And he had a globe on his desk, and he spun the globe, and he said, "Put your finger on Cyprus." And I hunted around. I knew roughly that it was in the Mediterranean. I said, "Right there." He said, "Unless the word Cyprus is followed by garden," Cypress Gardens was a local theme park, "I don't ever want to see that word in my paper, ever. Nobody cares about Cyprus." And I'm like, oh, well, I just learned something important as I slunk out of his office. So he did a lot of yelling.
Right. So you said you were there for 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
And so what was your next thing you did?
Well, I had to leave there because when I married my wife, they made one of us quit.
Right.
Because they had rules against people who are married working together,
Yeah.
which is kind of weird because they said, my boss said, "Why don't you just live together and there's no rules?" And it's like, because we want to get married. So then we started, my wife and I, we said, well, then we'll show them. We'll both quit. First, this is even better. First, we went to a lawyer and we said, this is what's happening and we think it's unjust.
Right.
And he said, "Oh, you could have a case." And he said, "How much do you make?" And I said, $10,000 a year. He said, "Why would you sue to stay at that job?"
Yeah.
What he was really saying is, "I'm not making any money off this case." So forget it. So our next idea was that we would apply to cities that had competing papers, and they wouldn't hire us because you're trying to scoop the opposition.
Right.
So our third choice was, we had been working on this story, and this is probably important to my formation. I know it is. We were working on a story at that Winter Haven paper. There was a teacher at Winter Haven High School who had gotten caught, for a nice way to put it, creeping up on one of his students.
Right.
He had a relationship with one of his students, and he got caught. And essentially what happened in those days when that happened, and that stuff still happens, is the principal would say, "Go away."
Yeah.
Okay? And so those people would go to other states
And just get away.
and start all over again and creep up on somebody else. So we found out about this, and my paper started, investigating, and they sent a reporter first to Tallahassee and around the state of Florida, and then we were working with John Walsh, who was the father of Adam Walsh. He used to have this show called America's Most Wanted. His 5-year-old was kidnapped in a mall and actually beheaded. They found him in a ditch, and so he started this campaign against creepy people.
Right.
And so we were working with him about this fingerprinting thing. And so that, because he had this TV platform that helped boost our, anyway, so because of that investigative series that we ran, the National Teacher Fingerprinting Law came into existence. Our paper was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. We ended up 4th runner-up in public service or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where Fleming will tell you, Schledorn won a Pulitzer Prize. So, I always say, people can look this up, right? And my name's not there.
Yeah.
So no, we didn't win. But,
It's still very impressive.
Oh, especially if you saw, it was mostly a bunch of people barely older than you, with my boss, the editor-in-chief. I thought he was an old guy. He was 36. So he's right. So he's not. So anyway, so yeah, we won a bunch of stuff, and because that was his being able to be an editor at that age, he was able to push things that he wanted to push, and then encourage that in us, and it was fun. So you could like redesign the newspaper. I could say, hey, you know what? In college, I wrote movie reviews. I want to write some movie reviews. I don't care. We need stuff on that page anyway. Go write movie reviews or music reviews or whatever. But it was really weird because I'm writing rock and roll music reviews, and the average age in Winter Haven is 53. So most of the people have no idea what I was writing about. I'm reviewing Prince albums, and So anyway, we moved. So back to where we were in the. I know my narrative's all over the place.
It's good.
So we applied. My wife got really interested in teaching because she was on that series of stories too, and she comes from a family of teachers, and so we started applying in cities. So Florida had this deal called the Florida Teacher Scholarship. Anyway, there was a shortage of teachers in Florida, and they would pay you if you went to college for 2 years and taught in a high needs area. You didn't have to pay back. You didn't have to pay for college. And if you taught in a low needs area, you had to work 4 years and not pay. All you had to do was agree, I'm going to teach for 4 years. If you stopped teaching before what you signed the contract to do, you had to pay for your education.
Right.
So we started applying in towns that had a paper and graduate schools. And so we landed in Tallahassee. She got accepted. She would kill me if I told you this because she hates anything that's not the Gators, but she actually has a master's degree from Florida State.
Right.
And I got a job in the Tallahassee Democrat that has nothing to do with party affiliation. It's just that back in the 1800s, newspapers were affiliated with parties. Yeah. But so when I tell people, I usually just tell people I worked at the Tallahassee newspaper because they think I worked for the Democratic Party. And the Tallahassee Democrat is no more democratic than Florida Today is, or any other newspaper. It's just the name of the paper. Anyway, so I went in there, and they said, well, there's no openings. And I'm like, this isn't going to work, because we were still looking. And they said, except in sports. I said, oh, I can do sports. I didn't know very much about sports. No. But I said, I can do sports, but I knew my wife knew a lot about sports. She subscribed to Sports Illustrated. She was all about the Gators and football, basketball, and baseball, so she knew all the major sports. And so they hired me to do essentially what I was doing in Winter Haven in the sports department up there. And like if I got stuck, if I didn't know something, I would just call my wife at home. This sentence makes sense because I don't really know this sport. Right. I mean, after a while, I kind of figured out what was going. I mean, I was a casual observer of sports, but not as much as I needed to be, really to do that job well. So yeah, we worked there. I was there for 3 years, and then I loved Tallahassee except for it was too far away from a swimmable beach, more importantly, a surfable beach, and so I really wanted to get back to where there were waves. Yeah. Plus, my family was here, my wife's family was here, and so I did some research, and I found out if you worked at Florida Today for 2 years, and you did well, they would transfer you to USA Today, which is the big time, because that's a national paper. So that was my plan. Plus, Florida Today, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but they flew me down from Tallahassee. Wow. They paid to move me down from Tallahassee. Like, I don't think anybody does that anymore. Yeah. It's not a big, long flight, but I came down and I interviewed and I worked on their copy desk in sports for a night, and they saw that I had game, so they hired me there. And I worked there for a couple of years, and then so working at Florida Today, because Al Newhart, the founder of Florida Today and USA Today, lived in Cocoa Beach.
Uh-huh.
His paper had to be perfect, and he
Yeah.
was a big baseball head, so that meant all of the baseball scores had to be in his neighborhood's paper. So if you don't, I don't know how much you know about baseball, but West Coast games like the Dodgers and the Giants, they start at 10 o'clock our time at night.
Oh, wow.
And a baseball game, as you know, goes on forever.
Way too long.
And if it goes extra innings, it goes on even more forever. Yeah. And so usually I was off. I would go into work at about 4, and I would get off at about 1, sometimes 2. Well, at this particular night, I had worked till 4 because I was waiting on some stupid game on the West Coast, because we printed a set of newspapers just for Al's neighborhood, because that's who he was.
Yeah.
And so I'm dragging myself home. We lived in Indialantic, and my wife was teaching at Satellite, and school started at 7:15, like for kids back in those days. So she went in before that. So I'm coming home, and I'm eating a frozen pizza, and she's eating a bowl of Cheerios. And I looked across the table from her, and I said, you know, we've been married 7 years, and we don't have kids, and I think I know why, because we never saw each other. Because as I said, I went in at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, which is the opposite shift that she's on. And because I worked in sports, I worked Friday nights. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are your big sports days. So my days off were like Tuesday and Wednesday. Like, so her friends would say, well, get your husband and we'll go out. And she, no, he works. Nobody works. And yeah, somebody does. Yeah. Hospitals and journalists. So so then we started thinking, if in order to preserve this marriage, it might be a good idea to get on the same shift. And I couldn't see, I was just getting ready to turn 30, I think, and I couldn't see another way. And she had been recruiting me into teaching anyway, like having me chaperone homecoming dances. I chaperoned Jen's homecoming dance when she was a student.
Funny. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really old. And so that's how I ended up. I went. So the critical teacher shortage thing was still a thing. So I went to UCF because my wife was teaching at Satellite. She let me take off graciously. She let me take off 2 years. It's the only 2 years since I've been 15 that I wasn't working a lot. And go back to college, get a master's degree like she did, and have the state pay for it.
What did you get in?
In English education. The truth is, I just went back to get certified, and they said, well, you have all of these credits from journalism that will transfer over. If you just go an extra semester, you can get a master's degree. Yeah. Instead of just getting a, certified in English education. And they said, well, this was the selling point. I didn't really care about the master's degree, but they said a master's degree pays $1,000 a year more, and that'll stay with you for the rest of your career. And it's probably gone up since then. But so I said, yeah, sign me up, because I wasn't paying for school anyway, except I was driving back and forth from Indialantic to UCF every day for 2 years. But yeah, so that's how that happened. And then when I got out, I was looking for a job, and I got a job offer from Cocoa High School, but they wanted me to coach cheer, and I said no. It's the reason why I'm not in public relations, because I'm not peppy and cheery.
That's funny.
Knowing me, it's even funnier.
Well, that's like a weird thing to request from a new teacher. Also, I feel like.
Here's the thing: when the system exploits young teachers because you have energy, you can stay up all night coaching and doing all that stuff that as you get older you can't do. And I said, no, it's a deal breaker. And so then I applied at a job at Titusville, which is even farther away. We're living in Indialantic, so. And I got that job. So for 3 years, I drove from Indialantic to
40 minutes.
Oh, easy. Yeah. Easily. I couldn't believe how much time I had left when I stopped doing that. And I stopped doing that because my wife had our first baby. She was teaching at Satellite, as I said, and she told them she was coming back. But after she saw the baby, she's like, "Yeah, I'm not going back." Yeah. So she ended up staying home, I think, 10 years. But So I went and interviewed with Dr. Galbraith, who founded this school. She was the principal at Satellite, and it was perfect because my wife taught the exact same courses that I was teaching in Titusville, and so they didn't even have to change the schedules.
Huh.
They just get the same name, everything.
Yeah.
And I always love to tell the story that my first day of class, I'm reading through the rule book like you always have to do, and somebody said, "My sister said you were a woman," and I said, "Well, I was," and I just kept going. And Sarah Brewer, that teacher I told you that I said I would come back, she came down at the end of the school day. She said, "You can't tell people you're a transsexual on the first day." And it wasn't like it is now, where people now would be like, "Oh yeah, probably."
Yeah.
I'm a troll. You know who I am, and I just kind of threw it out and kept going, and I didn't even know the kid.
Yeah, he is a little short. Maybe.
Right. just kind of stupid, that anybody would believe it. But the whole campus apparently was buzzing that there was a transsexual working. I used to be Mrs. Schledorn until over the summer I had this quick surgery and came back as Mr. Schledorn. I was like, okay. So I worked there for 8 years, and Galbraith left and invited me over here, and this school opened as just 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and I said, I don't do little kids. When they get older, come see me again. And we got a principal that I couldn't coexist with over at Satellite, and so I made the jump, and that was 22 years ago, and the rest is that. I didn't do newspaper the first year because somebody else was teaching newspaper, and I promised that woman that I didn't come here to take her job. She was a nice woman. I liked her. And by the end of that year, she said, "You really should take this job because you know what you're doing."
So what did you, when you first came to West Shore, what were you teaching?
I had 4 different rooms my first
gosh.
year. It was ridiculous. So in Miss Reese's room, where she is now, I had 10th grade English, and we had something called 0 hour because they had cut the budget and they went from a 7-period to a 6-period day, and to save money. And the band kids and their parents stormed the school board because if you take marching band, you have to have 2 classes of band at almost every school.
Or like biology.
Or anything like that. So they created something called 0 hour, which was the hour before school started. Okay, so, and it was optional. You could take optional 0. So kids could take 7 classes a day, but you had to have a teacher teaching the 0. So I was teaching a 0 hour English class, which was fine because I'm a morning person. I was teaching journalism 1, middle school journalism, yearbook. I had 5 classes, and I think I had 5 preps, and mass media. So I was teaching 5 classes. None in this room. Murphy was in this room.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was in that room, which is now the studio, and they had like poles going all the way through the room with all of the tables were along the middle, and they had poles to plug into like power. You can still see rings on the floor over there if you look, because that's how they wax around here. So yeah, I was in that room, and I was in Reese's room. I was in one of the math teacher's rooms upstairs, and I was in the bottom room of building 2 under the stairs. Part of the day I was next door to Hedrick. She came the same year I did. So I was literally the backpack teacher. Kids would see me, was there one teacher running around with a backpack all day. That was me. And I didn't have planning in any room, so I had to go plan in the media center when I had my planning.
Why did they do that to you? Like, were there just not enough rooms, or?
I don't know. That's the way the schedule fell, and I guess there weren't enough rooms. I really can't remember why. I just remember it wasn't fun. And I think Galbraith figured out, well, honestly, she might have gotten wind of it, but the worst part of it was they had just horrible computers next door, and nothing was networked. Everything was moving a floppy disk from one. And imagine doing Roar with no network.
Yeah, that'd be awful.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. And only one of the computers had enough power to actually run the yearbook program, and it wasn't connected to the bank of the so they had them daisy chained together, so there was like a fake network, like you just run a computer to a wire to the next computer, and you can read that computer, and I mean, it was
Like a jumper.
it was like that. It was ridiculous. And so I went that year. I took a day off in January to go over to Orlando and apply for a job to run Valencia Community College, now Valencia State College's journalism department, because the guy, a good friend of mine, was leaving to take a job at Eastern Illinois.
Right.
And so I went over there, and I was offered that job because it's like, I cannot, this technology is backwards. I can't.
Yeah.
I actually drew a circle on my desk and wrote "bang head" here, and I would every once in a while bang my head. And so yeah, I applied for a job over there. I got the job, and Galbraith kind of said, yeah, don't leave, because we can make stuff.
We can upgrade.
Yeah, and I was making enough money with Yearbook even in that first year that we bought a few Macs and then a few more Macs, and then got rid of those compact Presarios because they were terrible. I don't even know what they were about. So yeah, I don't know where that was, but you asked how I got. Oh, what
It was like
rooms I
your first class.
Yeah.
So how did you? In my mind of how your career progressed, you can tell me how this actually is in reality. You were doing English classes a lot, but you were also doing Yearbook. How did you? Was the Roar and WCTZ already a thing when you were here, or did you have to kind of start those things?
No. In fact, I didn't do WCTZ until 2015.
Oh, wow.
And they just started doing some stuff that was ridiculous and embarrassing, and so I kind of went to Fleming and said, I think I can do better than this. And he said that they were doing a program called CTE, which I think Finch is still on, and they buy computers for you and stuff. But Fleming didn't want to do CTE with journalism, especially with TV Pro, because you have to take this industry certification exam at the end. And at Mel High, I'm going to say 15 years ago, they built, more like 20, they built $1 million TV studio because the superintendent was having the TV Pro kids at every school do news, and it was on like Spectrum. There was a channel where you could watch Brevard student news, and they were all submitting packages. It was super cool. And then when CTE came in with this industry certification exam, well, you were teaching to the exam. So kids stopped signing up for the elective. It was really hard, and if you didn't pass the exam, you didn't get credit for the course. And so Fleming didn't want that here because he thinks we're stressed out enough, because we are. And he would have been right. So as far as I know, that studio at Mel High is not used. It's used for storage or something.
Wow.
Because they just killed it by putting that. So he said, can you meet all of the journalism certification state requirements, only do it with video? And I said, yeah, I can do that.
Right.
And that's what we're doing. If you watch morning announcements, they have to do the same thing that you have to do on Roar. And so that's when I did that. The Yearbook, that's really why Galbraith hired me, to get that straightened out and to grow it. And then, I mean, there are copies of the Roar, and the original was called the Wildcat Chronicle. There are copies in that drawer over there. It's ridiculous. I mean, it just is ridiculous. Part of it was because they weren't a full-fledged high school yet, and it took a while to get all of those pieces in place.
What were the students like here back then? Were they similar, or were they a little bit different?
So when I first got here, and by the way, I always mark when I got here because my first year here was 9/11.
Oh, wow.
So I was teaching in Reese's class, my mass media class, and Tyler Rice, I remember the kid's name, for his senior project, he was getting his pilot's license. And so he was super into planes, and he said, I just heard that, because we didn't have cell phones, so I don't know where he heard it, but he said, I just heard that a plane ran into the World Trade Center. And I was thinking that in the 1950s, I think it was, like a single engine plane hit the Empire State Building.
Oh, really?
You know, the pilot died, but it's not, you got the Empire State Building and a little single engine plane. It's a tragedy, but it's not. So that's what I thought he was talking about. But I said, yeah, if class isn't going to start for 3 or 4 minutes, let's turn it on, because we had TV sets on these shelves.
And it was mass media. So.
Yeah, and it was so that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I can't get in trouble because it's mass media. And as soon as we turn the TV on, a plane hit the second building, and I'm like, oh, we're not stopping watching this. This
Right.
is something that's crazy happening.
Mm-hmm.
So back to your original question, which was, sorry.
Oh,
how are the kids different?
Yes.
So when my third day here, I saw the worst fight that I've seen in my entire teaching career. A kid had another kid pinned up against the glass on the cafeteria and was beating him bloody, man. That kid was he was just pounding, and the other kid was helpless. The other kid was like a West Shore kid now, and the kid who was doing the pounding was not like a West Shore kid.
Mr. Murphy was telling me that like the kids at West Shore back then weren't necessarily like nerds or anything even like that. They were just...
Well, it took a while to get the system in place.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of homeschooled kids who, had never taken real math or science classes. Not all homeschooling is bad, but you did have kids whose parents' idea of math was, I'll take them to Walmart and they can, do the money at the cash register. That's probably a little bit of an exaggeration. So you had those kids, and they were wearing prairie skirts and were kind of, like Amish people. So you had that gang who was here. And then you had kids whose parents thought this would fix them because they were kicked out of other schools, and hence so you had the thugs here, and that's not a racial thing, that's like a behavior thing, because when you say thug, people often think black, and that's not what I'm suggesting at all. And then you had a few kids like what you have now, so it probably took... the school opened in 98, 99, and I was here for the first graduating class. It probably took until 2004 before everything started really cooking. Like everything was hitting on all cylinders. And Galbraith was kicking people out of here left and right in the early days. Yeah. And people were bailing too because...
When did they start the lottery system? Was it...
That was from the beginning.
From the
always
beginning?
had the lottery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other than sibling preference, has that always been from the beginning?
Yeah, they've tried to take that away.
I know.
The lottery originally was like names in a paint can with a handle. Like they would spin this can around and reach in and call out a name.
Do you know Mrs. Ortiz?
It sounds familiar. How would I know her?
Emily Ortiz.
Okay, yeah, I know.
Yeah,
who that is.
I think she was around for when they were doing that kind of.
Well, your sister probably was. Bridget
yeah,
probably
and I
was.
was gonna say like. You were talking about the homeschooling group. That was Bridget. Bridget was homeschooled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not. I have lots of friends who homeschool, but there are degrees of homeschooling that are more isolated than others.
Yeah, but it's just funny because she fits into one of those.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Please don't write in your thing or in your podcast that I said that homeschoolers are, because I really have really close friends who homeschool.
Right. So when you took over, let's say, yearbook, you already said the computers were a problem, and you had to start WCTZ. But let's say...
Well, WCTZ was running, and then it fell into disrepair, and then I kind of...
So what were some challenges with all three of those programs, getting them started up?
So yearbook was technology, as I already mentioned, and... Because we were doing stuff on floppy disks, like you get all your work done and you'd be getting ready to send it off. There was something called zip drives, which were like bigger floppy disks. But occasionally they would just get corrupt and the disk would just click. We called it the click of death, and you lost all of your work. And it's not backed up anywhere because you're not networked.
Right.
And so it's like, So there were a lot of long hours because you'd be redoing stuff. There were a lot of me taking those discs and slinging them up against the wall in that room because out of frustration, it's like, what the heck? I remember once we started, when we went to CDs, something like that happened and I broke a CD in my hand. The kids were like, he's crazy. It's like, no, because I was calm, but I obviously wasn't because they just heard this thing snap in my hand. So that technology was technology. It was horrible. It was, and I think schools get hosed a lot with technology because they don't know what they're buying. And the same with the TV studio. When they moved it from the media center down here, And I think one of the reasons they moved it down here is Fleming was thinking, oh, Schledorn could take this over, and then he would have the studio right there.
Right.
And one of the previous teachers left because the studio was where the IT guy lives now. It was next to that, and the room was all the way over where all the computers are in that room. So while they were filming the news and the advisor was in there watching them film the news, the kids in the other room were like stealing the memory sticks out of the computers and breaking the legs off desks, and just because nobody was watching them.
Yeah.
So that teacher's like, yeah, I'm out. Plus they offered her the job at Mel High when they did the $1 Million studio. And then the woman who replaced her was a nice woman. She just didn't have control, I would say. Good friend of mine, so I'm not going to mention her name, but she just, like, it was like a frat house when I took it over. There were no girls because they were kind of afraid to be in TV Pro because you just had, you know, I can't think of, I'm not going to name a boy that they were like, but you know who I'm talking about. So, yeah, when I took over TV Pro, in front of where Ethan and Addie sit over there, there were a set of theater seats that they pulled out of somebody's trash somewhere, like somebody had a home theater, super heavy, and the first thing when I walked in, I said, Derek, these go to the dumpster, because we're not sitting around in this class, you know, pretending to eat or actually eating popcorn. So I brought that kind of, I had to be, like, they were probably afraid of me the first year, because and they would say, we're doing it. No, you're not. Like, we're not? No, you're not. You know where the guidance counselor is? If you don't want to do it my way, go there. So that's how I kind of pulled that together.
It's interesting because you give us a lot of freedom now.
Well, because I've recruited people who I trust. Right. Those people I did not trust, and you had to bring order to the chaos before you can trust.
Right.
And some of that, this sounds sexist or something, but some of it was getting girls in the mix too, because, I mean, let's be honest, women are the civilizing force.
Well, that's why co-ed dorms are normally better than...
Right. Yeah. I mean, they are the civilizing force in the universe, because I don't know why, because we're idiots. I don't know. So that was the thing to overcome there. Plus, they sold us equipment that was already 5 years out of date. So the $5,000 machine, like, computer that they were doing live news, and I told Fleming, I'm not doing it if it's live, because I'm not risking what
could happen.
I think an F-bomb happened on TV or something, and I'm like, nope. And it was all on closed circuit TV at the time, so we'd film everything a day in advance, because it's safer that way. Yeah. So anyway, the piece of equipment, they said this is what they use at ESPN. Well, yeah, but ESPN probably replaces it every few years, and this is so 5,000. It's sitting in a closet over there. I can't even get any kid to want to use it, because as soon as we got it, it's not even high def. Yeah. So who wants to make, anything that's not high def? So that was, and your phones are better than that thing was. It's TriCaster is what it's called. I'm sure it is what they use at ESPN, but I'm sure they upgrade all the time. So we got hosed on that. As far as Roar, I think, again, getting just establishing the excellence, like, okay, yeah, well, this isn't going in. Well, I wrote it. Well, you're going to write it again, because it's not there yet. Plus, I came over here for Roar and for Yearbook. I came over here with a reputation from Satellite already. We were winning lots of stuff over there. So kids talk to, like, the kids who I left behind over there were telling the kids over here, you need to pay attention to him. So that gave me some street cred, because they were, unhappy. The funny side story, a kid at Satellite, Rick Russell, who I ashamedly helped get elected student body president, because he was a doof. I mean, he was just a goof. He wasn't a doofus, but he was a goof. That was when The Rock was big, so we got on Photoshop and made the Rick, and we put this arched eyebrow on him, and can you smell what the Rick is cooking? And we did these stupid videos, and he won, and I felt really bad, because this girl, like Ella, was running, and she lost, and I, after, it's like, oh man,
what have I done?
Because she actually is trying, and my guy is just goofing around. I mean, I like Rick. So my first day of school here, I'm up there in Miss Reese's room, and I'm calling roll, and I said anybody's name I didn't call, and I see a hand go up, and Rick's sitting in my class, and I'm like, you can't be here. Why not? It's like, well, A, you graduated high school, and B, not this high school. I thought I was going to get fired on the first day of school. We didn't have, bars up around the school and everything back then. So yeah, that's just a side note. Oh, yeah, I give people freedom until they abuse the freedom, and then I pull it back.
Right. So how long did it take for you to start getting recognition or winning stuff?
Here?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. I came here in 2001, 2002. That gold crown is from... It doesn't even say on it.
Silver Crown 2005.
2008 is the gold crown,
crown.
which is like... That's like the absolute highest other than a pacemaker. So it took me about... So the yearbook started hitting... 2003, we did the first all-color yearbook. Mm-hmm. That's when my system was starting to take. In 2004, we were like starting to be recognized nationally.
Nice.
And the Roar was kind of on that same trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then the program just started recruiting itself because oh wait, look, they're doing stuff and it's kind of cool. And we were the first school in the district to have a student news website. And Miss Rem had a lot to do with that. She was the English language arts resource teacher for the district, and she and I went to all kinds of places learning and researching and fighting with the school district because, kids will get kidnapped if they do this. And I mean, literally had an FBI person at one of the meetings. And finally, when they were like, nope, they wanted to do an intranet, which it's like the internet,
but internal.
But only, it's like, well, then what's the point?
Yeah.
So finally, it occurred to us, let's take parents with us to one of these meetings. So we got parents, and it's like, oh yeah, you can do whatever you want. What are you talking? Oh, we've always been behind you. And so that was 2011. That's when that was born. Mm-hmm. And then for a while, when I was doing yearbook, TV Pro, and Roar, I was making. We had an editorial board with leadership from all three of those entities, and we would meet once a week, and the website was our hub, and everybody in all three of those classes was doing beat reports, and we were, that's when I had energy. Things were cooking along really well. And that, not long after I took on TV Pro, I realized that it was a mistake, that I couldn't physically do all three things.
And that's what I was going to get into. At some point, you left yearbook.
Yeah.
So what prompted you to do that?
Well, yearbook kind of left me. So I had assembled what I thought was the best group of talent that I had at one time in a long time, and some of it is on me because that's when my parents started to fail, and I was running to my parents were in the hospital with broken this and broken that. They were in their 90s.
Wow.
And so I wasn't as invested probably as I had been, but I thought that the talent I had assembled could kind of hide that. And like my editors went to Fleming and said I was working them too hard, and Fleming says, I don't think he is. I think he's doing the same thing that he always was doing. And so it just it was a rough year. My editors would sit in that room and work on those computers, and the other kids would be over in this room working on these computers. Well, not these, but other computers. And it just was estranged and horrible, and I just thought, I'm now that football coach who's lost the locker room. You hear about that happening sometimes, and it's time for me to just stop doing this. Honestly, I loved doing yearbook. I did 28 of them, though, and yearbook is exponentially, if you're doing it the way I was doing it, and I think they're doing a fine job now, but if you look at like the 2013, 2014 books, there's so much stuff in them. I mean, it's just like, and we were getting national recognition. We're in a lot of Jostin slideshows that the reps were showing all over the country, and picture and bio were in some Jostens brochure that they were sending out, and it was fun, but it took a toll on my family because I would come in at 5 in the morning to copy edit things to make sure everything was perfect. I seldom got home. I was working 5 to 6 every day for probably 10 years.
Yeah.
And on weekends, and probably at the worst time of my life because I had my own kids at home, and they were probably sick of me saying, "So and so's amazing," and so and so, and it's like, well, we're your kids. So if I could go back in time, I would probably have done that a little bit differently. But I just was so into wanting everything to be amazing.
So, unfortunately, you are leaving this year. You are.
Well, unfortunately, is a loaded word. Yes, I mean everybody leaves.
I mean, yes,
in some way, somehow. I mean, that's
right.
just what happens.
But given the amount of difficulty you've gone through, obviously Capron has your book. Now, but with WCTC and Roar, how is
it? I'm going to be honest. That is a genuine concern for me, because more than half of the schools in Brevard Public Schools don't have student journalism other than a yearbook, which sounds insane, but it's true. A lot of principals, probably I've worked for 7 principals, and Fleming is the best principal. I mean, I know this because I have a measuring stick. I can't imagine a better principal for journalism. He is so pro student expression, free speech.
I know.
As long as you do it right. You're not just doing stupid stuff. He is like if he came in tomorrow and said, "I'm going to go another year. Will you go with me?" I would say yeah. Even though part of me would say that's probably not smart because I'll be 66 in May, and I am feeling my age. But yeah, if he said that, I would, and I don't want to break in a new principal because it's just too much. It'll be different. It doesn't mean it'll be worse. It'll just be different. So what was your original question here?
I think it was like, what are the difficulties you foresee?
Well,
what are you worried about it?
Yeah, I am because I mean I have an affinity for my journalism students. I really do. In fact, at the Quill and Scroll induction the other day, I suddenly choked up, which I don't do. It's like I don't even, because it just kind of hit me that like this is my last Quill and Scroll induction. And without knowing who the new principal is, first let me say nobody in this school is going to take over either one of those programs. Okay, I've already put that out there. I thought Mr. Thompson would be the heir apparent because he was on the Roar and on Arcadia yearbook. And so he knew, and he's a journalism major. I'm like, oh, this is going to be perfect. And then he had to get married and he had to go live with his wife, go figure. And she's in anesthesiology school in Atlanta. Without knowing who the principal is, it's hard for me to pitch this job because if it was Rick Fleming, I would be out pounding the pavement trying to get somebody to do this because I would tell them this is the guy. This is the guy who came into my Roar staff in 2015 and said the paper just came out and my phone's not ringing. You're not working hard enough because I expect people to be complaining when the magazine comes out because that's what journalism is. Whatever you write, somebody is triggered by whatever it is. And that's not a bad thing. That's kind of what it's supposed to be, provocative. And so to have your principal come down and say that to the kids, like that's unheard of. I mean, it really is. And he's had my back. Like we always come in, we always have the school board candidates come in to be interviewed by the editors, and they don't dare say no because you're running for school board and kids have asked you to be interviewed. And we've had some complain that you're not allowed to endorse candidates and things. It's like, well, the school isn't, I'm not, the kids are. They are endorsing who they think. And sometimes, I'm always a fly on the wall. Sometimes the people they endorse, I'm like, okay, we'll see how that works. But I don't say it out loud because it's they get to listen to the spiels and get to make that decision. And Fleming has always supported that. We had a school board member we had to go to Student Press Law Center because he's like blah, 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 blah. And no, we did everything right, but some principals would say, just don't do that anymore. It's too much trouble, you know? I mean, that would be most people's first inclination. But with him, it wasn't. So that's, I mean, all of the stuff, we just do so many cool things, and we have so much flexibility. And as you know, you can bring whatever point of view to the roar that's your point of view, and you got a voice. Yeah. So, yeah, that's, and I don't know if you heard this, but journalism is not a practical art anymore. And I know students know that now, and I know I would get a lot of kids in Journalism 1 because that was kind of the practical art option. So I don't know if there's going to, the whole system doesn't work without Journalism 1, by the way. If you don't have, that's kind of a weeder course, and if you don't have that for the kids to figure out, oh, I really love this, or I don't ever want to do this again, and as me, I can say there's no way I'm signing you into, and you might say, well, you signed some people onto staff that I'm questioning. Well, they weren't that person when I signed them in. Sometimes people get better, and sometimes they just flake out. That's just the nature of life. So, yeah, that's...
And I think, Ashfika, who's the probably up-and-coming editor-in-chief, I think she can hold it together. It's just based on whoever the new advisor is and how...
And I'm not trying to inflate my worth, but there aren't a lot of people who did this as a career first. What I think makes me effective as a journalism teacher is I've actually been a journalist.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's a whole different animal if you were, like right now I'm teaching debate, but I'm not a debater, nor have I ever been. And I'm not doing a very good job faking that because I honestly don't know. In 3 or 4 years I might be able to figure out how that works. It usually takes about 3 years to get things figured out, but because I was able to come in even at Titusville way back at the beginning of my career, their newspaper just looked terrible. You know, it just looked amateurish, and I brought in PageMaker, which was later bought by Adobe, who does InDesign, and I showed them how to make a desktop published paper on a Mac, and like people were like, this looks like a real newspaper. So,
I know, and it's not an easy thing to do. If anybody that's worked with Adobe anything knows it's
if you know if you have some design experience, which Capron does, by the way, so that helps her with your book. That helps bring that to the table. So right now, I have like feelers out with Journalism Educators of America and with FSPA, but I can't actually have any triggers pulled until we know who the principal is, because if I'm going to relocate, if I'm a teacher, I'm going to relocate. And Brevard County has a lot of, like, let's say you teach in, Minnesota, and you're looking out at a 50-degree February, and you're like, wait, there's a job at the 43rd ranked school in the country. This could be sweet.
Yeah.
You know, beaches and,
Yeah, it's a good place.
Yeah. So there's a lot to sell the area on, but I can't cast that broad net until I know what. I wouldn't move here if I didn't know what the principal was about.
Then my last few questions.
Yeah.
How is journalism, and especially student journalism, becoming harder today than maybe it was, let's say, 10 years ago? Obviously, technology has improved things along.
Right, but the hard thing is there are fewer and fewer models for students to look at. So, particularly before COVID, that's a weird thing to use as a dividing line, but before COVID, when you went to your dentist or orthodontist, they had a magazine rack on the wall. And people would walk over and pull a magazine and flip through a magazine. Well, they just go to their phones now. Nobody's going to go. I see the empty racks in those places, but I don't see any magazines. Same when you get your oil changed and that kind of stuff. I mean, they're just so without okay, this is what I'm shooting for. And there actually could be a career in this. Now everything's online, and it's not as monolithic as it was. There are all these niche things, which in some ways is good, but then there's a lot of stuff that says it's journalism that's not. Yeah. That's not. Journalism is hard if you do it right. I mean, I hope if you know this, if nothing else from the roar, like verifying your facts and making sure everything is what you say it is.
It's a lot easier to write an opinion piece, in my opinion, than to write an actual story.
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of darn work, and if you're doing it on a larger scale, it's even more work.
Yeah.
And so, without these models, like when I started have 3/4 of my career, my room was full of magazines and newspapers, and people were, in their downtime looking through them, and that's all gone. And the internet has stolen all of the revenue from news organizations, so they can't afford to print anymore, and they cut their staffs, and their work is sloppier, and it's not proofread.
Yeah, I know. I've noticed when I'm like reading print or journalism online,
Yeah.
it doesn't follow the
No.
format that we use here.
No,
and it doesn't even follow the ethics of the format we use here.
You are right.
So
and like Sports Illustrated, which used to be one of the premier, Ernest Hemingway wrote for Sports Illustrated, premier magazines, not just sports magazines, but they have top flight famous writers, just got busted for doing their stories with AI. They got caught. And I knew they were AI because they were terrible, but so now that whole brand is because they sold the brand to some, I don't know, hedge fund thing, and they just milked all the money out of it. So I don't know what the other issue with journalism is. What career am I pointing kids to?
Yeah. Because
it's different, and in one way that's why it's good for me to get off the stage, because like David Thompson, he knows where it's going. I've never even been on social media, so I've never been on Facebook, and that's not even a thing anymore. And that's where it all is now, and where it's going to continue to go. So you need somebody who can teach those skills. I'm frankly not interested.
I will say, I think journalism really helped me with coming up with questions, trying to get a line of reasoning out of somebody, which I'm trying to do law, which is that's the main part of doing a court case, is getting questions.
Right. It's interesting that you say that, because when I was in journalism, so many of the reporters that I knew, as they started hitting their 30s, because journalism is a young man's game, they went to law school. Yeah. Especially ones who covered the courts are like, well, I can do this, because lawyer, it's, you got to be like a doctor and a lawyer, those are
the big titles. Yeah.
Right. But when they would actually go in and do the first observation and the research, like, I'm smarter than some of these people.
No, I've sat through court cases, and not all the lawyers are brilliant people,
right,
or most well prepared.
Right,
so,
right. So that's what I'm saying. So that was a natural kind of thing. You did journalism because it's your passion, and then you kind of aged out a little bit, and then you went to law school.
Yeah. So I definitely think there's really important parts about journalism, and I think it's concerning that it seems to be going away to some capacity in the traditional styles that we've been using.
I think it's especially concerning because it emboldens leaders to just do whatever the heck they want. They think they have nobody watching. Whatever you think about slants and biases and all that stuff in journalism, the reason why the press isn't licensed like beauticians and teachers and everybody else is because it has to be not controlled by the government, because one of its primary functions is to report on corrupt government. Right. And I won't say most of it, much of it is corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I really do believe that taking away journalism is a practical art, and taking away a certification in journalism for teachers is in part because the people running the show really don't want to grow more journalists.
That's interesting, yeah.
I really think I don't think I'm
I mean, it makes sense if you want.
Conspiratorial.
If you want, they're not journalists. You just stop teaching it.
Yeah.
Mr. Schledorn is retiring this year after a long career in journalism and teaching. His experience and leadership will be greatly missed. Thank you for coming onto the podcast, and I hope you enjoy your much-earned retirement. Thank you.